So our topic today is like the future of B2B sales post-pandemic. And I'm like, aren't we like post-pandemic now? But then when we started diving into kind of the things that we're going to talk about today, I'm like, you know what? This is an interesting topic. And it's like where we were, where we are, and where we're going.
Welcome to the Making Sales Social podcast, featuring the top voices in sales, marketing, and business. Join Brynne Tillman, Stan Robinson Jr., and me, Bob Woods, as we each bring you the best tips and strategies our guests are teaching their clients so you can leverage them for your own virtual and social selling. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Making Sales Social Live. Hey Stan, how are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you doing, Brynne?
I'm doing really well. You know, I'm excited for today's program. Although when we were talking earlier about what's our topic today, I was like, really? So our topic today is like the future of B2B sales post-pandemic. And I'm like, aren't we like post-pandemic now? But then when we started diving into kind of the things that we're going to talk about today, I'm like, you know what? This is an interesting topic. And it's like where we were, where we are, and where we're going. So I think it's really fun. So, you know, before we jump into like our tips and tactics and strategies, how do you feel that the sales from pre-pandemic to now has changed your world? Not necessarily for everyone else, but how has selling post-pandemic, what is that experience for you?
It's funny because pre-pandemic, I was still teaching social sales
Right.
and digital sales. So the idea was to try to get clients comfortable with the fact that you could start relationships online, find people online, and then once you've begun the relationship online, of course, take it offline.
Right.
And that, whether it be phone or Zoom or in person, which is what we're used to. And then, of course, out of left field came the pandemic, which caught everybody by surprise. But the ironic thing is, sales leaders were scrambling, looking for ways to, not to have sales drop through the floor, and digital sales became a logical choice. Um, so my experience was a little bit different from most in that the pandemic kind of pushed people to look more closely at what we've been talking about, um, and changed expectations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So and I've had that same experience. Our business thrived through the pandemic because everyone came and said, okay, it's time to do this. But let's talk about what the rest of the world, the changes that some of the rest of the world have felt, right? So
Yeah.
tools and technologies before the pandemic. There were a ton of tools, obviously CRMs and prospecting tools before the pandemic for sure. And so what happened, so the tools were used and there was definitely an emphasis in the sales process, but a lot of them were siloed, right? So a lot of these tools were tools on their own. And one of the things, I guess, during and post pandemic that I've seen, well, number one, the video conferencing tools went through the roof, right? The Zooms, the Microsoft Teams, Google Meets, right? Like that went through the roof. But the other thing I noticed is a lot of these tools now started to become completely integrated into the CRM. So in most sales worlds, the CRM is the one place of truth, right? So who's feeding into that? And so that's what I've seen with tools. Did you see
Point.
what are you seeing? And then what do you think will happen with tools moving forward? Especially in the
I think,
AI.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, It's funny when you mention integration, I'm not sure when LinkedIn introduced the ability for you to schedule a video call, whether
That
that
was
was
during the pandemic.
post-pandemic. It was
Yeah.
during the pandemic. So great example of integration,
Mhm.
um, and the push to that. Going forward with AI, integration is just going to be part of the game, whether you're Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, because people don't want to use a whole bunch of standalone tools. They want to be able to use as few tools as possible and do as much as possible with them. And it is funny because yes, the players are integrating AI into their sales tech stack.
Mhm.
Not so much in sales, but in other arenas, we've started to see something called pseudo AI, which, believe it or not, some companies have tried doing demos where a human being would actually be the one doing what they were talking about, but they would say that they'd integrated AI. Believe it or not. When I first heard about companies trying to do this, I said, what are you thinking? Um, but that said, everyone's talking about the fact that they've integrated AI into their
Yeah.
tools.
Well, it's amazing that we didn't have ChatGPT until about a year and a half ago. Like, yeah, like I
Yep.
can't, I just when I think maybe we've had GPS in our cars for 15, 18 years, something like that. I don't remember how I got places without it.
Yep.
I don't remember how I communicated with clients before email. I can't imagine selling without LinkedIn now. And
Mhm.
I can't imagine having these tools, these AI generated tools now. A year and a half is all we've had. And I don't remember how I did things before AI. Right. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's the big shift, right? Post pandemic. There was these AI tools did not exist for for the average person, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Until about a year and a half ago. So it's absolutely crazy, including virtual reality and augmented reality. All of these things are becoming part of the customer experience. As simple as from a consumer perspective, I go on Amazon and I'm looking at a new dining room table or credenza, and I can look at it in my room. I can focus in my camera from Amazon and I can see what this piece of furniture looks like in my room. So this is being integrated consumer and B2B across the board. So I think the tools, I'm going to go back to the tool stack. When I was at People Links as a chief learning officer, I remember part of our conversation with prospects was listing out their tool stack. And
Mhm.
they would have 30, 40 tools. We do. We have Calendly, we have Zoom, we have Magical, we have Restream. We have, like, if you look at, we have Kajabi, we have Google, we have Gmail, like we have so many tools. I couldn't even list them all right now. I'd have to look at my Amex bill, right, to figure out what are all
Yeah.
the tools that we're using. So this tool stack is huge. It was huge before the pandemic. I think they started to curate it down. And now what they're doing, I think, is integrating. So that's the three steps. There was just an insane amount of tools. And now, like our Zoom and our Google Calendar are completely synced. We have that embedded in our website and our Kajabi. So they're going, we have a marketplace link where anyone can go and look at like everything is now being combined for easier UX. The user experience now is streamlining, right? So
Yes.
so one of the things that I'm blown away with that Sales Navigator did is the integration they have into HubSpot CRM is unbelievable. It is complete, which I think is so funny. I mean, they have it for Salesforce and they have it for Microsoft Dynamics,
Yes.
but this
Mhm.
integration into HubSpot is magic. It is amazing.
Wow.
And the reason is you can work in LinkedIn and still be connected to your HubSpot CRM and your calendar and your everything is now integrated. So for me, my one source of truth, we do have a CRM, but it's LinkedIn, right? We don't really use our CRM the way that we should be. And if you have 10 salespeople or more, this HubSpot integration is absolutely incredible into Sales Navigator. So
Wow.
that's post-pandemic integration. Let's jump to
Yes.
mindset. Right? The mindset before the pandemic was focused on volume and velocity, more calls, more meetings, faster, right? Like boom, boom,
Mhm.
boom, cold calls, cold calls. And personal relationships were important, but they were not at scale, right? They were big dinners out. They were doing that. In fact, it's fun. My girlfriend just said she's a big sales person at a CVS company, and they took out an entire client in New York for like huge, right? Like they're still whining and dining, not as much as they
Mhm.
used to. I
Used
was
to
like,
be.
oh, really? You're still whining and dining? Wow, I didn't realize. But before, I don't know how many I would go to lunch with centers of influence. I would have lots of coffee meetings. And now I think the mindset shift is we could do it all on Zoom. We don't right, I haven't done a networking coffee meeting in person in a really probably before
Long
pandemic.
time.
Now I do a
Yeah.
lot of chamber and you're doing a chamber meeting tomorrow, right? So you'll be in person
Mhm.
tomorrow.
Exactly.
And so
Yep.
it's not like so I think that's coming back. So I think the mindset before was a lot of cold calling. And I think during the pandemic, no one answered their phones and we didn't have mobile phones. So cold calling absolutely died during the pandemic because
Didn't.
no one sat in their office. There was no
Mm.
way to get through. So that's where social selling came in. I do think people are back in their office as a hybrid, like 2 or 3 days a week. So there's some of that. But I think the after pandemic on that is a greater focus on engaging prospects digitally, um, creating valuable insights to share versus mass cold calling. So it's a shift really from transactional approach to building rapport and earning the right to get some conversations. So what are your
Yes.
thoughts? Yeah,
Yes. Yes, one of the things the pandemic forced people to do is realize that you can make big ticket sales with virtual meetings, that you don't necessarily have to meet all the decision makers in the same physical room, but
right.
that you could sell six-figure deals via Zoom.
Hmm.
And as you said, post pandemic, in some ways, companies are still trying to go through, okay, do we let everyone work remote? Because there were different schools of thought about productivity as a
Hmm.
result of working remote, and I've seen studies on both sides that productivity, it went up in some cases, and in others it went down. So there's no definitive answer, but companies do have to figure out: do we bring people back? Do we remain hybrid? People who've been remote, how do we handle that? It's still an issue. Tech companies who you would think, oh, remote,
Zoom
of course
called
they're going to
people
work
back.
remote.
Zoom
Yeah,
called people back.
exactly. And I forget who another major one. Might have been
Amazon was a
Salesforce.
big one,
Yeah, yeah.
which
So because there are things you lose when you're remote in
oh,
terms of.
not was it might have been Tesla, not Amazon. Tesla.
Okay,
I
yeah,
think Elon Musk made like, "If you don't come back, you're fired" statement.
yeah,
Um,
which is totally counterintuitive. You would have thought it would have been just the opposite
yeah, so
for
here
high
here's
tech companies.
the interesting thing is when you go virtual, you have a much bigger talent pool to choose from. Right. If and it's not just, hey, the collaboration, but for young people. So I have a friend whose, son is looking for an internship, and there are internships that are virtual. And they're like, but I want him in the office with these people to experience that. And it's different today. It's
Mhm.
so different. So I love that. Um, I think we are more empathetic than we were before as salespeople. I think we recognize that um, more. I hope, at least my experience, is that there's much more focus on helping people solve problems than selling.
Mhm.
Not with everyone, but there's definitely the servant leadership is coming back from so long ago, right? We really just want to bring value and understand that the sales will come. So I do think there's a shift in some places. And I think the next generation coming up, which is our kids, right? Like your
Mhm.
is I think they want to make a bigger impact. Like it's really
Yes.
about social responsibility and having an influence, and what you do is important, right? And so I think that's the beauty that came out of post-pandemic.
Yes, social consciousness, absolutely. And since all of us went through the pandemic together, like you said, I do think it made people in general more empathetic because, we all went through a major crisis. You weren't exempt from that, regardless of your station in life.
Right.
Everybody went through it. So very true.
Yeah. So the
Very
last thing
true.
I want to talk about, although I kind of touched on it because I always kind of mess up our order of conversation, but is accessibility. So what I find so interesting is where pre-pandemic, I don't know, now I should have looked up selling to the VIP, right? Selling to the CEO. There were books on how do you get through the gatekeeper, and how do you, and I think so pre-pandemic, getting through to the high level decision makers was hard. People were literally knocking on doors and leaving, candy bars with a business card, or they were cold calling and they'd have their assistant answering and gatekeeping. And so getting, I think, to these CEOs pre-pandemic was hard. Now, during the pandemic and after, I think it's been a lot easier if they share content. So we
Mhm.
teach go ring the bells or save leads in Sales Navigator so that when they share content, we're alerted and now engage. So when a CEO shares content and you engage, you matter to them. Right? We can get access to them faster, stronger. We can reach out directly. Most CEOs don't have an assistant gatekeeping their LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
right, so we can get in. The other thing we could do that we couldn't do before LinkedIn is social proximity. We can see who in our network knows that CEO and potentially make an introduction, and we're coming in with a higher level of credibility.
Yeah.
So pre-pandemic, I think it was really hard to get those face-to-face interactions. It was really hard to get, it was so like um it was just really hard to get to them. And I think with everyone going digital, because everyone
Mhm.
went digital during the pandemic, they are now more accessible. What do you think around that?
That is that's a good point. It did force more people to go digital and just to start to think about creative ways. So social proximity, as you were saying, even if your primary decision maker is not too active on social, some of their colleagues maybe.
Right.
So that's why we talk about connecting with people, above, below, horizontal
Yep.
to the person you're trying to, so you can surround them socially and either get an introduction or just raise your level of visibility because you're interacting with their peers,
Mhm.
uh, and so forth. So, so yes, definitely in that sense, it's forced us all to be more creative, and possibly to some extent, people to be more receptive, just in
Yeah.
terms of interacting.
Right, because there's an expectation of engagement, right? It's like you go to a networking meeting, you expect to start a conversation. So you go,
Yes, exactly.
so these folks are way more open if they share content and you engage on their content. They share the content to start the conversation.
Conversation.
So I love that. The last thing I have before we wrap this up is I think there's a huge shift in sales territories, in territory management from a sales leadership perspective. It used to be, if you were in the Midwest, you had the Midwest territory. If you were in the Northeast, that was your territory. And it was based on geographic location. It doesn't have to be anymore. And so I think that's one of the biggest shifts in companies is when they set up their their I keep saying territory, but right, like their group, who they're going after, it can now be based in setting up based on social proximity, not geographic proximity. So what
Mhm.
I mean is typically it's like you live in the Northeast, you get the Northeast, this is your territory. But now, and this is huge, and when we're working with our corporate clients, we talk a lot about this. How do you get the most out of your sales team? Well, first it's take inventory of who they're connected to and at what company, and who they know that's connected to your target market, and set up your accounts you based on social proximity, no longer geographic proximity. And that to me is the biggest shift.
Yes, for companies that realize that or are taught that, like you mentioned, because now we've never talked about this, but I would guess that the clients that you mentioned, until you mentioned social proximity, it's not something they would have thought of themselves. Because most
Probably.
of us, yeah, most of us are used to thinking of geography or verticals by industry, but when you tell them, well, you can use social proximity and it's almost account management or account structuring based on
Accountability.
relationship rather than geography.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something you can do probably with someone during an interview. Who are you connected to in these industries? If you
Mhm.
connect with them on LinkedIn, you can search and you can see what their network looks like. I don't know if that's HR compliant, so check with your HR department before you do that. I don't want to be responsible, but I'm just
Yeah,
saying, you can see, what is their social proximity, because that when it comes to sales, that's where you want to start. You don't want to just hand them a list of, you went to Zoom Info and pulled down 50 companies and say, go at it. What if you went to Zoom Info and you found 500 companies and then you drill it down to the companies they have connections in or they're one away from? Now you've got 50 companies that they have a pathway to their buyers. So
yes. Yeah.
that's that. That was a lot of fun. Any last
Yes.
words before we bring this in for a landing?
No, that's it. That has been great. It's going to be exciting to see how AI increasingly becomes integrated into the sales process
Yeah.
and to the tools that we've been using. So, future's exciting.
Yeah, and if you're looking for, I mean, we've got tons of content in our free library. If you go to socialsaleslink.com/library, we've got lots and lots of free resources that can help you just be on the edge the cutting edge, the leading edge,
Leading edge.
the of the future of sales. That's our commitment to you. So again, that's socialsaleslink.com/library. You can check out some of our events at socialsaleslink.com/events. And if you are enjoying this episode, you might be live. Go to socialsaleslink.com/podcast and follow our podcast to subscribe on whatever platform works for you. We would love that. We're on YouTube and all those fun places. Just come join us because it's just so much fun to have you guys around. So Stan, thank you for such an awesome conversation today. I loved it.
Same here. Thanks, Brynne.
And to everyone, to everyone out in the audience, in the listening visual, wherever you are consuming this, when you are out and about, don't forget to make your sales social. Bye, guys.
Don't miss an episode. Visit socialsaleslink.com/podcast. Leave a review down below. Tell us what you think, what you learned, and what you want to hear from us next. Register for free resources at linkedinlibrary.com. You can also listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Play. Visit our website, socialsaleslink.com, for more information.